Today's episode is brought to you by Liquid Death. I'm happy to announce that the Return of the Rat Tour will be picking up some steam. February 2nd in Jacksonville, Florida, at the Florida Theater. February 3rd in St. Petersburg, Florida. February 5th, Orlando, Florida. February 25th, Rockford, Illinois. February 26th, Chicago, Illinois. And Friday, May 6th, over there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Saturday, May 7th in Los Angeles, California. What else? That's it, man. I'm excited about it. Rockford, Illinois, home of the Rockford Peaches. We are members of the All-American League. I'll be excited to be over there, seeing everybody and doing it right. Those are on sale today, on Thursday, until 10 p.m. With the code RATKING. You can go to theovon.com/tour for tickets. And thank you guys so much for supporting my career. I'm excited to get over there and bring the new tour to you. Let's go. Today's guest is returning to the show. He is an attorney, an environmentalist. His new book, The Real Anthony Fauci, is on Amazon, New York Times, and USA Today. #1 bestseller. He's my friend. I'm happy to spend time with him always. Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr.
For me to set that parking brake and let myself unwind. Shine that light on me. I'll sit and tell you my stories. Shine on me, and I will find a song. I will sing it just for you.
Yeah, thanks for coming in, man.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's really good to see you. The book, man, I've read as much as I can and listened to as much as I can so far, just because it's a lot of information. You know, especially information probably isn't my top strong suit, but I think it's getting better. But what was like the research process like for putting together a book like this?
A lot of it was just like reading my emails, because I have a listserv with almost 300 doctors and PhDs and PhD scientists on it. And so a lot of the kind of the current science, if there's a new study that comes out in the Lancet or JAMA or any of the 4,000 journals that are out there, I see it almost immediately.
Okay.
And then I see it discussed by people who are highly critical and know how to read science critically. So I can see them arguing with each other and criticizing the study and finding its weaknesses and all that kind of stuff. And it allows me to kind of make better evaluations of it. But, you know, I've known Fauci for a long time.
Okay.
And I also have a peculiar insight into the phenomena of agency capture. And that is the dynamic by which environmental agencies and public health agencies become sock puppets of the industries they're supposed to regulate. And it happens with every agency. So
Happens with everything.
It happens with all of them, whether it's the SEC or the FDA or, you know, the
ACC.
Any of the three-letter agencies. Ultimately, over time, the industry figures out how to infiltrate them, how to control the senators and the congressmen that write their budgets, how to get control of that agency, because it's so important for their profit ambitions.
Right.
And so I probably brought over 500 lawsuits as an environmental lawyer, mainly against polluters who are discharging into the environment, into the air, water, whatever. But probably during the 38 years that I was doing that, probably 20% of my lawsuits were against the EPA or the state environmental agencies for issuing these kind of sweetheart illegal permits.
Because they get compromised also, you're saying?
Because they get compromised. So I was used to that dynamic.
Right. God, it's got to be hard to navigate.
Of seeing the agency that's supposed to be my friend but is actually my enemy, on these environmental issues. Oh, I was accustomed to that. That dynamic is particularly acute. It's really on steroids in the public health agencies because there are these unprecedented entanglements, financial entanglements. For example, FDA gets 45% of its annual budget from pharmaceutical companies. So they're really, there's really it's kind of a seamless subsidiary of the industry. And it's agency capture on steroids.
So the FDA is funded mostly by pharmaceutical companies.
About half of their money comes from pharmaceutical companies. And that's because we passed a law in the 90s that actually in the early 2000s that allows, it's called fast track approval. So the drug companies were complaining that these drugs take 10 years to get approved, and a lot of particularly the Republicans on Capitol Hill who want the agencies to be more industry friendly, they said there ought to be a process where the industry can come in and pay to get a very, very quick approval. And so now...
That seems dirty business.
It is dirty business. There's a kind of a rational reason for it. As the agency said, we simply don't have enough personnel to quickly process these applications. So Congress said, okay, well, we're going to get the industry to give you the money to hire the people to process it. But really what happens is the agency is now being paid to do its job by the industry, and they become partners. And they're no longer a regulatory agency. They're really, their regulatory mission gets subsumed by these commercial and mercantile, forces.
Of course, yeah, big business.
Yeah.
That's big business. And like you're saying, it happens in every aspect.
Yeah, and
once advertising and everything comes into anything, it gets a little bit polluted.
Yeah, and with the COVID, crisis, from the beginning, it really the response to the public health agencies was not a public health response. It was a mercantile response. Yeah. It was, how do we get money to these vaccine companies? It wasn't, how do we save lives, and particularly with our country. And that's why, our country, we have the worst track record. So we have the highest.
With what?
Well, we have 4.2% of the world's population, but we had 20% of the COVID deaths. And that's all on Anthony Fauci.
Right.
The mismanagement that took place. He basically got rid of early treatment. So 80% of the people who went to hospitals should never have gone to a hospital.
Yeah, it felt like that. This is a regular person. It felt like something strange here, that all these people are just hooked up to this thing. They're being hooked up to machines.
Well, if you went to, let's say if you went to your doctor.
Yeah.
And you have maybe a headache or you lost your sense of taste. It's an early symptom. It's not debilitating. And he gives you a PCR test. And the PCR test says, hey, you have COVID. What does that doctor now do? Here's what he does under Tony Fauci's regimen. He tells you, go home till you're so sick that your lips turn blue because you can't breathe, and go to the hospital, and we're going to put you on a ventilator, which is going to probably kill you.
Right.
And we're going to give you remdesivir, which is going to probably kill you.
But did they know in the beginning that because it felt like they didn't know, like no one knew how severe it was. So at first, maybe they don't know what to do, the doctors, right?
The thing is, at the very beginning, you can say that. But by April, they knew that hydroxychloroquine worked.
Right.
And they actually knew much earlier because in 2005, NIH did studies on coronavirus that showed hydroxychloroquine obliterated it. And then in 2013, 2014, Fauci funded studies on MERS and SARS, which are coronaviruses, that again show that hydroxychloroquine completely destroyed it.
Okay, so what was the difference this time whenever they did trials?
The problem was, And see, the Chinese, the pandemic only lasted for 2 months. Why? Because they were doing early treatment. They were also doing a lot of other stuff, really aggressively locking people up who had COVID, but they were treating them. They were treating them with chloroquine, which is hydroxychloroquine plus. They were treating with antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, anticoagulants, steroids, monoclonal antibodies, and vitamins. All the things that we know work.
And we weren't treating. We weren't doing a lot of treatment.
We were not doing any early treatment. And the reason for that is this. Fauci was focused on the vaccines. It was a $98 billion enterprise. Wow. And he had to get, for that enterprise to work, he had to get them emergency use authorization because otherwise the pandemic would be over by the time they got their real, permits, their licenses. You had to get them emergency use authorization. It is illegal under federal law to give emergency use authorization for any vaccine if there is an existing drug that has been approved for any purpose that is demonstrated effective against the target disease.
Right, and hydroxychloroquine, you said, had been demonstrated effective.
It was, and now there's 285 peer-reviewed studies that show that 80% of the people who went to the hospital should not have gone. If they had gotten hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin early, they would not have gone to the hospital and they would not have died. But if Tony Fauci recognized that, the entire vaccine enterprise would have collapsed because he could not have given that. It would have been illegal for him to give emergency use authorization to any vaccine. So he had to kill those drugs up front.
Who controls the emergency use authorization?
He does, because he was in charge of the COVID response. And he's the one who decided.
Can you move this back?
He's the one who decided we're not going to do early treatment. We're going to wait, make sure everybody has to go to the hospital, and we're going to tell everybody, lock yourself up, put the whole country under house arrest, and wait there till we get our vaccines ready. So don't do anything else that helps you.
And you're saying he knew.
He never did what you would want America's doctor to do, which is to give a speech to the American public and say, you need to take vitamin D. You need to take zinc. You need to lose some weight.
Right.
Because it's the obese people who are going to die. You need to get outside and get exercise. You need to build your immune system. When he was at, 80% of the people who died from COVID were vitamin D deficient.
Wow.
We know that vitamin D completely, it destroys COVID. Mm-hmm. There's a study that came out 3 weeks ago that said if anybody who had 50 what they call nanoliters per deciliter of vitamin D in their blood did not get COVID. And it said hypothetically, you could have completely eliminated COVID deaths by making sure people had adequate vitamin D.
Yeah.
We never heard that.
Sunshine.
And people have known that for years. We know zinc works against common cold.
Yeah, it did seem interesting. There was no, okay, these are things you can do to help prevent yourself from COVID. Everything was just...
Wait till you get the vaccine. Put a mask on.
That's a good point.
Social distance. Lock yourself in the house.
Well, even also the weird thing of if people got it, that they sent them back home, just go home and be in a room at your house. That was weird to me. It's like, well, if this is so deadly, then why is my friend Brendan, you just told him to go home and be in a separate room than his family who's in this, but not to be in different buildings.
Well, and that's the thing. Or they're sending sick people to nursing homes where they're going to kill everybody in the nursing home.
Yeah.
It's the inverse of everything that we knew that you're supposed to do in the pandemic. It's the inverse of everything the Chinese did. The Chinese, if you were sick, they grabbed you, they brought you to a hospital, and they gave you early treatment. They would not let you go home. What Americans were told to do, go home till you get so sick that you're going to die.
Oh, yeah.
Then go to the hospital. Well, every one of those hospital visits was a super spreader event because that person now is infecting. They're putting maximum viral loads out into the environment. They're infecting their whole family. They're infecting the Uber driver, the DoorDash. They're infecting the people in the hospital, the people in the ambulance, and
Dry cleaner.
It's not what you would want to do if you wanted to stop the pandemic.
Right. So then my question there would be like, do you feel like, but did Fauci know this? So like with the book, are you saying that they knew this in advance? Like they knew that hydroxychloroquine would help. So because the book kind of alleges that they shut down a lot of like I don't know if it's over the counter or under counter hydroxychloroquine. Like there's places where it was allowed over the counter.
In Canada, France, many other countries, the hydroxychloroquine is available or was available over the counter. And at the beginning of January, as soon as they heard coronavirus was circulating, those countries reclassified it as a poison, so that you can only get it by prescription.
No, but did Fauci have anything to do with that?
If you look, the countries that didn't do that, the African countries where hydroxychloroquine is taken every Sunday, it's called Sunday in Africa because everybody takes it on Sundays for malaria prevention. And those countries, the death rate per million population was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In our country, 2,200 per million population died from COVID. In Tanzania, less than 1 per 2,200. So we had 2,200 times the rate of death as the Tanzanians had. We had 1,000 times the rate of death as the Chinese did. You look at the African countries and nobody's dying. And one of the reasons for that is probably that they're all on ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine.
Do you think they could be underreporting over there too because there's less like information?
Yes, that could be happening, but we're also overreporting here.
Yeah.
But everybody agrees that those countries have done better than us. Right. We don't, you make a good point. We don't know there's been such sloppy, haphazard reporting that we really don't know what happened in our country. I mean, even CDC says that only 6% of the Americans who died from COVID had only COVID. That the average number of comorbidities in the other people who died, in 94%, was 3.8 comorbidities, potentially fatal comorbidities. So we don't know whether they died with COVID or whether they died of COVID, and we'll never know that.
Do you believe that they knew before? Like, did they know like that the virus was coming, or was this a surprise thing that happened, and then I guess who am I even trying to say? Like, because I know the book talks about how like big pharma, basically pharmaceutical companies, and like fancy rich people, basically, I guess, or powerful people, kind of like cannibalized the hydroxychloroquine thing. I don't know if cannibalized is the word, but like tried to sink it. Like there was a test that they did, like European test study or something, where they used too much to show the trials that it didn't work.
Yes. So what happened?
Like how'd they get us to believe that hydroxychloroquine didn't work?
What they did was Bill Gates funded these 3 studies, the Solidarity study, each group of studies with thousands of people. Solidarity study, recovery study, and remap study. And in those studies, they studied hydroxychloroquine, supposedly, but what they really did, hydroxychloroquine only works if you give it to people in the first 10 days after infections or first symptoms.
Okay.
If you could give it to them once in their hospital, the disease has changed at that point, and it's not very effective.
Oh, shifter.
So they only gave it to people who were hospitalized in order to discredit it. And then they gave people 3 or 4 or 5 times the normal dose. So they were giving them lethal doses, and they were killing people. And in fact, the researchers that did the studies in Brazil killed, I think, 29 out of 41 people who were in the study. They're elderly people.
Oh, they always
and they're currently being prosecuted for homicide.
Really?
By the Brazilian prosecutors, but that's how they were able to persuade the world that hydroxychloroquine is dangerous. They were giving them doses of hydroxychloroquine that they knew were going to kill people.
So, but then, well, wouldn't they be brought up on charges? Wouldn't they be like,
In
you know,
Brazil, they are being brought up on charges.
so just the testing facility, but not, it wouldn't go up to Gates. In fact, it wouldn't go up higher than that.
Well, if you read in my book, there's an interview with one of the researchers who was being funded by Gates. And he's talking to a very famous scientist called Tess Lowry, and this is in the first chapter of the book. She's a researcher for the WHO. She's a contract scientist who does clinical trials for the WHO, and she was doing a meta-review, which is a review of all the literature on hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. And she was talking to a scientist who was clearly on the take. And she was saying to him, we are looking at the same studies, and you know this drug works. So why are you not telling the truth about it? And he's saying, I'm being pressured not to. Wow. 3 days before he issued his study, Gates donated $40 million to his university. And it was Gates' organization that was funding that study, and clearly Gates had a strong interest in killing ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine because Gates has invested in all these, Gates had invested billions and billions of dollars in these vaccines.
Right,
and if hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin worked, his enterprise would have been torpedoed.
Been spoiled. Yeah, because the HQL or whatever, is that HQL? Is that what they call it?
HCQ. Hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, hydroxychloroquine. It's like $10 a dose or something, right? It's not super expensive
It's like
to put
30
together.
cents a dose.
Oh, damn. They cheapened
It's
it
30
up.
cents a pill.
I got screwed then. I freaking paid it. Yeah, the batch I bought is a little spicier than that. But why would they do it? It was just to. And
the remdesivir is $3,000 a
Right.
dose. And then, of course, the vaccines, which don't work, are making even more than that. Not more per dose, but they're making, huge amounts of money.
Well, let's stick in the space right now where it's like, so they tried to create articles and stuff that and trials that dissuaded people from using the hydroxychloroquine. There's a lot of that about that in the book.
Yeah.
And the information. Because I would see stuff like you would see stuff come up sometimes on social media like this, and what if this works, or people are having effectiveness with this, and it would always be shut down, right? It would be like either just lambasted by just the masses, or it would be like scrapped from platforms, like scrubbed out of platforms, right? Like you saw this sometimes with information. How would the people who are creating this plan, basically, to get this vaccine through, how would they also be able to get people to then halt any information that's coming out that's contradictory? Because there's just so many people that can put out information,
Yeah, and what I would say is we ought to have free speech. Is that if somebody's telling a lie on the social media, if somebody's saying something that is not true, that the remedy for that is not shutting them down.
Right.
The remedy that is more speech, is being able to show people
Totally.
different. It's let ideas triumph in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And not somebody be in charge of shutting them down. But very early on in the pandemic, the media the media is funded by pharma, and they have been doing censorship on pharmaceutical issues for decades. But the social media really, for the first time, started acting as censors. And, many of these companies are deeply tied in with the pharmaceutical industry. Oh. Google has 3 vaccine companies. Google makes one of those companies.
It owns 3 vaccine companies.
Well, Google's parent company is called Verily or Alphabet, and that company, so Google has sister companies that are making vaccines. They make flu vaccines, they make
women are always
vaccines.
up to something. Yeah.
Zuckerberg has about $1 billion invested in vaccines. of, from his foundation.
So a lot of the big money that are tied into these tech companies, they also own pharmaceutical companies.
And they have deals with pharmaceutical companies. Like Google has a $76 million deal with GlaxoSmithKline, and they have all kinds of deals with the pharmaceutical company to mine information, health information from their databases, and so they're really kind of part of the pharmaceutical industry.
Right. And why is it that industry has gotten so? How did we let this industry, the pharmaceutical business, get so big? I mean, I see it all the time, like in recovery places and stuff like that. I see some people that I feel like are alcoholics, and I see some people that are victims of just insane medications. It's like you see people whose lives have just been wrecked by pills that they couldn't combat if they had a million weapons, the power of some of the oxycodons and all of that stuff. How did we let these pharmaceutical companies start to control the way, how do we let them bypass whatever government we had looking out for us or something, and how do we let this happen? Does that make sense?
One of the issues, yeah.
Okay, good.
One of the issues is pharmaceutical advertising, what they call direct-to-consumer advertising. So there's only 2 countries in the world that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise to the consumers. Other companies say, no, you can't do advertising. If you want a drug, go to your doctor and he will tell you. In our country in 1997, we changed the rule so that allow pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV.
Oh.
So in 2017, I went to the president of Fox News, who's a guy called Roger Ailes.
Oh, yeah, I remember him.
A very famous guy.
And he's dead, huh?
He died. But when I was 19 years old, I spent 3 months with him in a tent in East Africa. Oh, and I had this weird relationship because he was like, for me, politically, he was like Darth Vader. We had a personal friendship, and we both enjoyed each other. And he was very, very kind to me. I was doing environmental stuff, and Fox News doesn't like the environment too much, but he would make sure that the shows on Fox News would always let me on to at least talk about my side of the story. Mm-hmm. And I went to him, I think around 2018, I went to him with a movie that we had just made about mercury and vaccines. And he had a child who had been, that he suspected was vaccine injured. Mm. He was very sympathetic to this movie, and he saw it, he watched it, he believed it. But he said, I cannot let you go onto my network to talk about it. And he said, if any of my hosts allowed you onto their show, I would have to fire them. And if I didn't, I would hear from Rupert, meaning Rupert Murdoch, within 10 minutes. And he said to me, during non-election years, we get Fox News for its evening news. That's up to 70% of its revenues from pharmaceutical companies. Oh, and if you look, and he said,
that's the banker.
Typically, there's 22 ads on an evening news show, and typically about 17 of those are pharmaceutical ads. So those companies are not just using that as a platform to promote their products. They are dictating content on that news show, and that's why Anderson Cooper makes $12 million a year. $10 million of that is coming from Pfizer, typically.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so he
knows who he's working for,
right.
And that's why he's always promoting flu shots and vaccines and medications and all of this, and telling you need to lock down, you need to do what the pharma tells you to do. And meanwhile, they locked us all down. They put us, they induced this this condition called Stockholm Syndrome, where Americans are living in terror. They become grateful to their captors, and they believe that the only way to return to normal and to survive is total compliance to to their captors, and that's what we're kind of dealing with now in our country.
Why aren't there more people who try to or who are trying to speak out against this? What's interesting so much about the book so far that I've read is just how many it resonates with like these really like fears and kind of questions I've had about this whole thing. Like a lot of it hasn't passed like some of the smell tests for me. Ironically, I've just never felt comfortable with some of the ways some of this has been handled. Like I've witnessed friends, like I've had 6 friends that overdosed in the past 2 years, and are dead.
Well, you and
right?
I both know a lot of people, and
and if just are dead, like, and like they didn't die of COVID, they died because they couldn't get into there are no recovery rooms, there's no meetings, there's no connection of humanity. It's like people, they don't know that somebody cares about them because they're not seeing other humans every day. They're locked away because of the masks and stuff. It just seems like, how would there not be more of a just revolt coming out of more people to question this? It feels like.
Because fear disables the part of your brain that does critical thinking. And if you can, this is a lesson. It's one of the alchemies of tyranny. If you want a totalitarian regime, and Goering said this at Nuremberg. He said it's an easy thing for any government to manipulate its people. You just have to get them scared. Tell them there's an enemy, and what better enemy than a germ that can get into everybody's house and kill them, and that you're the only one that compliant. If only doing what you're told is going to allow you to survive. And one of the things that I don't know if you've seen this, but in October of 2019, there was a pandemic simulation called Event 201, and I write about it in the last chapter of the book. And Event 201 was a group of people who simulated a coronavirus pandemic. Now remember, this is in October of 2019 in New York City at the Pierre Hotel. And there are a lot of big shots there. And we now know, according to the National Security Agency, that COVID-19 began circulating on September 12th.
Damn.
So in Wuhan.
That's a rough month for us across the board historically. Right. Then.
Well, September 12th, what happened is the NSA, the satellite, and there was chatter all over the internet coming out of Wuhan of people talking about symptoms that were very much, and also cures from those symptoms. The hospital parking lot, the aerial photographs show that it was full. There were 3 people in the lab who ended up going to the hospital with COVID symptoms. The Chinese government that night at midnight went into the lab. They removed 22,000 samples of coronavirus that were public in the lab, and they've never been seen again. They also took all of the public-facing web pages, and they removed documents and papers about gain-of-function studies.
And we know this is a fact. This is a fact?
This is what the National Security Agency is saying, that they believe that September 12th was the day that it actually began circulating.
Okay.
A month later, you have in New York City Bill Gates hosting a coronavirus pandemic simulation. At that, his co-host is Avril Haines, the deputy director of the CIA. What is the CIA doing at a public health forum? They don't do public health. They do coup d'etat. But now Avril Haines is the top spy in America. Wow. She is the one who hid the torture tapes from Abu Ghraib, during that CIA scandal. So that she now is the head of the National Security Agency, the top spy in the country. She's also in charge of the coronavirus response. At the simulation, you have Avril Haines, you have people from all the social media companies, You have people from the pharmaceutical companies, mainly Johnson & Johnson, the biggest one. They do, and you have another guy, peculiar guy, George Gao, who's the head of the Chinese CDC.
Oh, man, he sounds sneaky.
So George Gao must have known
Yeah.
that this was circulating at that point. By the way, any of your listeners who does not believe what I'm saying can go and look up Event 201. It's still on YouTube.
And this was before the pandemic.
It was after it started circulating, but none of us knew about it till
Okay, so
January.
this is after the NSA had said that this had occurred.
The NSA now says, looking back,
I see, this had
is
occurred.
when it occurs.
And
At
this-
that time, they didn't know.
So then there was a get-together.
The world did not know
Right.
until around January 3rd.
So then there was a big get-together of some...
So then they're all together planning, here's how we're going to handle a coronavirus pandemic if it happens.
Was Fauci there or no?
Fauci was not there, but there were people from his agency there. So, and the interesting thing is, there was no discussion of public health. They weren't saying, how are we going to get repurposed medications? How are we going to link 11 million doctors, frontline physicians around the world on a communication grid so that we can quickly figure out what's working, what's working in Bangladesh, what's working in Argentina, what are the best protocols, what are the best repurposed medications that seem effective against
Right, like what's already working against this type of thing that we could ask people to get prepared and get on now to help themselves.
Well, no, but even when it starts, if a coronavirus pandemic starts, you want to be able to talk to all the doctors who are treating it around the world and find out, because there may be a guy in Argentina, which there was, Dr. Carvalho,
Who's got good intel.
who was giving ivermectin to people. He gave it to 700 frontline healthcare workers, and he gave a placebo to 458. And of the 700 who got it, not one of them got COVID. Of the 400 who didn't got it, 53% got COVID. So he knew that very early on. But that wasn't being communicated. And if you were Fauci and really wanted to do a public health response, you'd be connecting all these doctors and mining what is the best intelligence, what's the best way to treat people, how do we avoid hospitalizations, how do we avoid deaths.
And you're saying they were just connecting more of the business side of it.
They weren't. The only thing they were doing was they were saying, how do we use a pandemic to clamp down totalitarian controls, to essentially execute a coup d'etat against democracy? How do we get rid of the Bill of Rights? Oh,
You think that they brought that up in this meeting?
Listen,
I'm not saying that-
nobody should believe me on anything. They should go and do the research themselves. And you go to Event 201, and here's what you'll see. The fourth simulation that day, they took breaks. There was a total of four. The fourth one is the longest one. That whole simulation is, how do you get the social media companies to censor dissent? And how specifically do you get them to not talk about the fact that this was a lab-generated virus? The George Gao says that, and this is what they're talking about for 2 hours. This is in October.
What was their fear? That if people thought it was a lab-generated virus?
Then they would start pointing fingers and blaming not only the Chinese, but blaming public health officials who were all funding, those studies in Wuhan.
Oh, I see.
It was not just Fauci who was funding the gain-of-function studies. It was the USAID, which is a CIA conduit. It was DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. And it was the Pentagon through DARPA and BARDA. So they were giving hundreds of millions of dollars to develop coronavirus superbugs that could cause pandemics. And they were doing it with the Chinese.
So you're saying that you believe that the whole thing was even planned ahead?
No, I'm not saying it was planned ahead. I'm saying, and this is not controversial, we know this was happening, as well documented.
Okay.
They were publishing about it.
Okay. So you're publishing, they were doing this research there.
They were doing research to develop bioweapons.
Right.
And they were saying, we're doing the research because the same research that we need to do to develop bioweapons, we can also develop vaccines. It was illegal for them to develop bioweapons.
I see. Because it's
So they were saying we're doing bioweapons research, but it's clear they were doing.
Well, it's weird to create a murder test a prison. That's a weird thing. It's like, why would you, train murderers just to test out a prison facility you built. But is it the same people paying to do the trials that own the vaccines?
Well, the thing is, Tony found there was an anthrax attack.
Oh, damn.
On our country in 2001.
Oh,
3
yeah, I
weeks
remember
after
it.
9/11.
I remember.
So, and in 1972 or 69, we signed a treaty that said you can't develop bioweapons anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody touched them. The CIA was secretly doing it, but the Pentagon was not. In 2001, after the anthrax attacks, and the anthrax attacks were blamed on Saddam Hussein, and they were used as a justification to.
Oh, he's a fat patsy. That guy's a fat. They you know what I'm saying? They put anything. You pin anything.
It later
on that
turned
dude.
out the FBI's investigation showed that the anthrax had not come from Saddam Hussein. It had come from one of 3 U.S. Army laboratories. Somebody in the military had something to do in the U.S. military with those anthrax attacks.
Okay.
And what happened is, after the anthrax attacks, they used that as an excuse to start developing bioweapons again. The Pentagon did not want to do it within the Pentagon because there was a loophole in the treaty that said you can't develop bioweapons, but you can do dual-use research. Dual-use means research that is bioweapons research, but it also is useful for developing vaccines.
Okay.
So they began funneling $1.6 billion a year to Tony Fauci to do weapons research because the Pentagon didn't want to do it in the Pentagon because they said nobody's going to believe that we're doing vaccine research.
I see. It would just be too erroneous.
Yeah, so they farmed it out to Fauci, and they gave him a 68% raise.
And where was he at the WHO at that time?
No, he
or
was
no?
at NIAID.
Did he ever work for the WHO?
No.
Oh, yeah.
He worked for 50 years at NIH. That year, his salary went up 68% from the Pentagon. And today, he's the highest paid person in the federal government.
That's insane to me.
Yeah, but his 70% of his budget is for doing this bioweapons research. That's why he had to keep doing it, even when Obama ordered him to stop in 2014.
Wow.
That's when he moved it offshore to Wuhan. And they all moved to Wuhan.
So Obama tried to shut him down.
What happened is in 2014, 4 of his bugs escaped, or 3 of his bugs escaped from different labs. And 300 scientists petitioned Obama and said, you got to shut down Fauci because he's doing this research. He's going to release a bug that is going to cause a global pandemic. Obama ordered him to stop. He illegally continued to do the worst of these studies at the University of North Carolina with a scientist called Ralph Barrick. But he began funneling huge amounts of money, laundering it through this sketchy con man called Peter Daszak, who's a zoologist who was working for the CIA. And he began, and the CIA and DARPA began funding all of this money, $100 million through Daszak to distribute to Chinese military scientists at the Wuhan lab.
Okay.
To do the studies there.
To do the studies. And the purpose of doing the studies is...
They say it's for vaccines, but it was really, the Chinese were really open. They said we're doing bioweapons research. They didn't care.
Yeah, Chinese or whatever.
But the Americans were all saying this is vaccine research, but the Chinese were saying this is weapons research.
Yeah. They'll flick a cigarette right into a damn fucking newborn baby.
One of the really telling studies that Fauci funded at the University of North Carolina was a study that to develop what they called a seamless ligation process, which was a way of hiding the human tampering. So what they were doing is they were taking coronaviruses that infected bats. Mm-hmm. They were removing the spike protein that could only infect bats. And they were inserting a spike protein that was designed to infect humans. They used, the way they tested is they had humanized mice with human lungs. So they had bred mice with human lungs, and they were testing these microbes on those mice. And if the mice got sick, they knew humans would get sick because they had an H2 receptor. Right, they had human lungs.
And how do you even get a human lung in a mouse? You think?
With little tiny tweezers.
Oh yeah, that's crazy.
They bred them.
But so they're over there doing.
So what Fauci funded? Not only was he funding them to switch up the spike protein that only infected bats and switch it for ones that would only infect humans, then he was developing processes for hiding the evidence of human tampering. So that's the last thing that you would want to do if you cared about public health,
Right.
which allows malevolent people to conceal the fact that this virus was human-made.
Wow.
And so it had nothing to do with vaccines. It was about, and he funded it. Ralph Barrick, who he gave 57 grants to this one scientist. Barrick calls it his no-seum process. It's a process where you can alter it and then nobody can see it. He then taught that process to the Chinese military scientist, Xi Xingli. She was the bat lady. Damn. And he taught her how to do it. Yeah. And then for 2 years, the Chinese went dark. And then we had COVID-19.
So do you think that it was created on purpose then, and then it got out? Like, do you think that it was created on purpose, and then because they knew that they would be able to, because I don't know if it's Fauci, but they knew that they would be able to then use the.
Well, here's the thing. In my book, I don't do any of that kind of speculation.
Right.
What I show is the facts. And then people, I think if you read the facts, you can make up your own mind about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of facts in there. I mean, look, and there's so many cited sources. I honestly felt like you were like a guy, like we were playing the game Clue, and you're like in the room. You're like, I'm in the library with the candlestick. It's exactly kind of what it really felt like, the energy coming out of it. There's so much information.
I'll tell you one of the revelations in the book.
Okay.
Fauci gave $2.2 billion to this little Cambridge company called Moderna. And Gates did too. Gates was pouring money into him to develop an mRNA vaccine. The head of that company is a French guy called Stephen Bancel. The company that built the Wuhan lab was a French company called bioMérieux. Part of their contract was to develop what they call a negative air system that keeps airflow from flowing outward. Mm-hmm. It's a very sophisticated, and you need it in these BSL-4 labs, these biosecurity 4 labs. They're the most protective labs in the world, secure labs in the world, and it's where you need those labs to do these studies. You need a negative airflow system because some of these bugs are going to get into the air,
right,
and they could go out.
You got to keep it indoors.
So he was contracted. bioMérieux, the French company, was contracted to build the negative airflow system, but they didn't do it. Mm. The head of that company was Stephen Bancel. Mm. He then goes without building that system. So he has a good idea that these bugs are going to escape.
Damn, that's a dark
He then goes, and he becomes the head of Moderna, and which Fauci is funding. And in March of 2019, so this is 5 months before the escape, he goes back. He's been denied a patent for his mRNA vaccine. He goes back and reapplies to the U.S. Patent Office for the patent. And in the patent application, he says there is an urgency that you give this patent to me and process this immediately because of the chance of an accidental or deliberate release of a laboratory-generated virus, that this vaccine is the only thing that will cure it.
Wouldn't they research and know that he has the ability to?
Well, we have his patent application, and It says that in there.
Wow. Damn. Oh, man, it's a lot to digest.
Well, I'm very impressed that you made an effort at least to read it.
Yeah, I think I'm maybe almost I could possibly be halfway through. There's parts where you talk about, and this was something that I heard spoken about a lot, that there were that doctors or facilities got more money if there was a COVID death than if it was a regular death.
Yeah.
Is that true or not?
Yes.
Okay.
And, the hospital systems were heavily incentivized to classify every death they could as a COVID death. So even people who came in with car accidents, we know this from a lot of whistleblowers, were, if they could get a positive PCR test, they were given remdesivir. They would put oftentimes on intubation because they got $39,000 for doing those procedures on them.
did.
And if it was a COVID death and they coded it COVID, even if the person didn't die of COVID, he just had COVID in his blood, they got a lot more money. So it's one of the things that really confuses the data that we have. And, we don't have any good data, and that's one of the problems. But let me just talk for a second about the Pfizer study, because everybody's taking the Pfizer vaccine. It's the only one that has approval.
Okay.
The Pfizer vaccine study, the trial, from the beginning, we knew it was going to be rushed. Tony Fauci promised us it's going to be completely transparent, and we're going to get 4-year studies. So we're going to know. You need long studies when you study medications.
Oh, anything. Dude, it takes 4 years to get to college. You got to be 4 years to be a banker.
Yeah, because there's a lot of
one.
injuries that come from medications, but particularly from vaccines.
Yeah.
That have long diagnostic horizons, or they have no long incubation period, so you won't see them in 6 months. They're cancers, autoimmune diseases, seizures, neurodevelopmental diseases
Of
that
course.
you will not see in a 6-month period. And also what they call antibody-dependent enhancement, which coronavirus are notorious about. If you get a vaccine, in all the previous experiments with coronavirus vaccines, the people who got the vaccine and the animals who got the vaccine actually got sicker when the coronavirus came back around, when they were exposed to wild coronavirus.
Damn
and
it.
you won't know that until you have a long-term study.
Right.
Oh, what did he do? 6 months into this study, he declared it over.
Who did, Fauci?
Yeah, he unblinded it, which means he told all the people in the placebo group, you're in the placebo group.
Oh, yeah. It's like that
And
show,
he gave the vaccine to everybody in the placebo group.
Yeah,
So
Blind
he
Love.
erased the placebo group, which means we have no way ever to have long-term ideas about.
Based on that study, there's no way to know long-term.
No, because it was unblinded and everybody in the placebo group was given the
that
vaccine.
true?
Yes. Then they took.
That's crazy, dude.
Let me tell you the rest of this. And they took the data from that 6 months.
This shit sounds like clown paste that they're shooting into people, man. I mean, that sounds crazy.
Then they took the data for that 6 months and they brought it to FDA, and FDA gave them a license. What did that data show? Here's what it showed. There's one graph that's called S4. You can see it. It's in my book in the first chapter. And this graph is the most critical graph because it is the graph for all-cause mortality. In other words, when you look at the vaccine group and you look at the placebo group, which of those groups had more people alive at the end of the study, had more people dead at the end of the study? And here's what it says. There were roughly 22,000 people in the vaccine group, 22,000 people in the placebo group. At the end of 6 months, this is what their own data show, one person in the vaccine group of those 22,000 died from COVID. In the placebo group, 2 people died from COVID. That allowed Pfizer to tell FDA and the American public the vaccine is 100% effective because 2 is 100% of 1.
Yeah.
So most Americans, when they hear the vaccine is 100% effective, they think if I get the vaccine, I'm 100% not going to die of COVID.
Well, why wouldn't more information come out? Like other people be screaming that this seems like kind of a ridiculous thing. Why does it seem like
Because the press is all censored. I mean, when you air this show, you're going to get killed.
Oh, we're scared. Yeah, we're scared.
You'll probably be off the air. I don't even.
We could be.
You might have to take it down. But let me just finish what happened. So what it really means, most Americans think I 100% won't die of this if I get the vaccine, but that's not what it means. What it means is they have to give 22,000 vaccines to save one life from COVID. Now, if you're going to give those 22,000 vaccines, you better make sure that the vaccine is not going to kill even one person, because if it does,
Right.
it's now cancel out the entire benefits.
damn.
Well, here's what their data show. And again, this is table S4. I urge people to go to it. In the vaccine group, 20 people died of the 22,000 over 6 months. In the placebo group, only 14 people died. So what that suggests is that if you take the vaccine, you're 48% more likely to die over the next 6 months than if you don't. How are they dying? Mainly heart attacks. So in the vaccine group, 5 people died of heart attacks. In the placebo group, only 1. What that means, if you get the vaccine, you have a 500% greater chance of getting a heart attack than if you don't.
Based on that time period of that study.
Yeah, and the study is probably a crap study that doesn't really mean anything because there were too few people in it. Robert Malone, who invented the mRNA vaccine, told me this week, he said, that study means nothing. They can't do a study with 22,000 people. It sounds like a lot. They needed 400,000. They're going to give this to 350 million people.
Yeah.
They needed 400,000 people in the study to make any real predictions. So these predictions probably aren't real, but they're stuck with them because they're the ones who said we're only going to put 22,000 people in the study. And what their study shows is that for every life that they saved from COVID, they killed 4 people from heart attacks.
Wow. We got a question that came in actually right here from a guy for you, Bobby. That's right.
Is this live?
This is not live. None of this is live, and this question isn't live. This is all
because I want to make sure you have an option of not playing this podcast.
video. No, I don't. I think we're okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm genuinely curious, and I think
I'm worried about your career, Theo. That's why.
Well, I feel like I own my own career until, like, I don't need a Hollywood career, but it's definitely, I worry about, like, my career of, like, I guess, maybe, like, YouTube canceling us or people saying that we can't do this anymore,
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
Is this on YouTube?
Yeah, this will be on YouTube. So, but our last one stayed up.
Okay, well, let's make a bet. I'll bet you $5.
Well, inflation's happened a lot. Let's make it 10. All right, deal? We got a good question right here from somebody that came in. Yeah.
Hey Theo, hey Mr. Kennedy. I'm here with a question for y'all. So I got the COVID vaccine. I needed to in order to keep my job. I live in the city of Philadelphia, and they're pretty gung-ho about making sure everybody's vaccinated. But anyway, I got it, and I ended up having myocarditis, like developing heart pain and a serious reaction as a result of it. And I don't really know what to do. I don't have good health insurance or anything like that. I can't really spend a lot of money to get to the bottom of it. And all we hear in the news is like, oh, it's so rare for people to have these effects from it, but like we don't hear much at all about what to do if you are one of the people that ended up having one of these side effects from the vaccine. So I was wondering if Mr. Kennedy here has any advice on what to do if you do get that pumped up ticker, and how to help deflate that bitch.
Dang, baby.
Or I mean that person,
I mean, that guy could have also had a strong carbonara sauce from a cousin or something that freaking amped his kicker up. But I think that's
myocarditis is a really serious disease. I mean,
damn.
I mean, really serious. 50% of the people who are diagnosed with myocarditis either die or require a heart transplant within 5 years. So a lot of these, the CDC is telling people, well, these are mainly mild case. There's no such thing as a mild case.
Yeah.
What that means is they discharge you from the hospital and you go home and you have 6 months of bed rest. And a lot of the people who are most susceptible to it are athletes. There's a very, very strong Hong Kong study that came out a couple of weeks ago that says that for young people, 1 in every 2,700 is getting myocarditis. That is huge, particularly because...
we don't know if it's vaccine related.
No, from the vaccine, that are reporting myocarditis from the vaccine. Kids don't have heart attacks. Kids don't have strokes.
Yeah.
Myocarditis, these athletes you're watching every day, literally 2 a day now, athletes are collapsing on playing fields. And it's from myocarditis and it's from the vaccines. And there's no question about that. And that's what this study shows. 1 in 2,700 people are getting myocarditis. For kids, there are 2 studies out. They're now going to give this to children. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to get myocarditis from the vaccine.
Jesus.
What the Lancet study showed is that they were not able to find a single healthy child in America that died from COVID. There are children who died, but they're people very obese or a lot of comorbidities. They couldn't find any healthy children who died. Germany just released a study of its database, and very, very similar. They found the death rate in healthy children was 3 per million.
Okay.
So 3 per million, and under 5, 0. Literally 0. Not one kid found it who died from COVID. If the death rate is 3 per million, 1 in every 2,700 people are getting myocarditis.
That's different.
That means you have 100 times greater chance for every one person that they're saving from COVID. There are 100 people getting myocarditis.
What about this? Couldn't it? But you're not an anti-vaccination.
No.
You're here.
No, I'm
so
not.
the vaccination does it help people, or do we just not know the long term what's going to happen?
I don't think anybody. First of all, the vaccine. What Tony Fauci said the vaccine was going to do, and Bill Gates, was that it was going to prevent transmission and prevent hospitalization and prevent you from getting the disease, and it doesn't do any of those.
Yeah.
It does not prevent transmission. A vaccinated person, according to the best science we have now, and Tony Fauci has said this, and if you need it, I'll send you the recording and you can put it in here.
Okay.
He even says that you're equally likely to transmit the disease if you were vaccinated or unvaccinated. So
it feels hella confusing. I mean, people are still have to wear masks. You don't have to wear masks. It's this, it's
right,
that.
And there's no, people originally were saying that you're more likely to get a severe disease, but when you look at the one database that seems most reliable is the British, the UK databases. And what those databases are showing is that the people who get COVID, who get the vaccine, are more likely to be hospitalized. That's what their data is showing.
Okay.
Those data may be skewed in some way. They may not be completely reliable, but it is the best database in the world, and it's not showing that the vaccine will avoid hospitalization or death. We're not seeing that.
But why wouldn't Fauci and Gates and some of these big-pocketed dogs have a say-so in that kind of study coming out? Why wouldn't
you mean of the NHS data? That's raw data. That is data that for many, many years, the British have been publishing their mortality and morbidity data directly from the hospital, directly from the corners, directly from the health agency, so anybody can look at that. And when you look at that and you can compare on that the hospitalized people who were vaccinated to the hospitalized people who were unvaccinated, and what you will see is that you're actually more likely to end up in a hospital by that data.
Okay.
If you got the vaccine than if you did not.
Right. And that's still early in data, too. We still need a longer time.
It's still early, and we don't, and also there may be, the data could be skewed, and let me tell you how, so that people can understand. You could argue is that the people who were early vaccinated were less likely to get COVID early. And when the vaccine wears off, now there's more of that subset who are getting sick and getting hospitalized than people who are unvaccinated by percentage. So we don't know the answer to that. I doubt that that's really what's happening, but, we don't know.
How did have there been doctors that have come out and supported your book as well, or is there like?
I mean, there's a list of hundreds of doctors.
I know there's tons of data from doctors in there.
Yeah, but if you look at the beginning of the book, there are a couple of pages of just very, very tiny type of all the doctors who are opposing the Tony Fauci narrative.
And do you feel like has the book been? Have you been supported by any mainstream media outlets? Do you feel like it's growing in some senses? Do you feel like it's...
The book has been completely boycotted by the media.
But the sales have been amazing.
We've been, at the top of the bestseller list. I mean, the New York Times won't put us number one, even
if you were number one.
Well,
yeah.
we are number one because we know how many. For example, I think in the first week we sold 93,000 copies. Will Smith sold 85,000, and he's the top. I'm number 7, and I sold more of my books than all the other ones, but they still put me 7 because I just think they don't, they do not want to give me the publicity of being number one. The Wall Street Journal put me number 1. The USA Today, which is the hardest one because they combine all the books in the world, including fiction and nonfiction together. So that's the hardest one to be number 1, and number 1 there. Publishers Weekly, number 1. Amazon, number 1, number 2, and number 3, day after day after day. And number 1 for the weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of people since you were coming on who've certainly reached out to me and applauded the fact that we were just going to talk about it. We've had another good question that came in here. Let's get to one of these.
What's up, Theo? This is Adam. Hello, Mr. Kennedy. Congratulations, your book's number 3 on Amazon right now. I just checked it. I had a question. In your book, in the back, you had a list of arbitrary decrees. And I thought it was very interesting. I was going to get your opinion on New York's recent decree from de Blasio about vaccination across the whole city, even for private businesses. Thanks.
We actually, I've already made the case that if the vaccine is not preventing transmission, what is the justification for mandating that somebody take it?
Yeah.
Listen, we signed the Nuremberg.
I agree. That's my big question. Why do people have? It doesn't seem deadly enough for people to have to.
But even if it's deadly, it's my choice. Nobody can make me take a medicine for my own good.
Right.
And there's a argument. If me getting the vaccine is going to prevent other people from getting the vaccine, there's no argument that the state has the right to force me to take the vaccine. But that argument doesn't exist because if you get the vaccine, you're equally likely to transmit the disease. By the way, we signed the Nuremberg Protocol. A lot of Americans died so that we could sign the treaty at the end of the war. And the Nuremberg Protocol says we will never again, no country who's a signature, will ever again force individuals to take an experimental product without their informed consent. No form of coercion is legal. And all of the vaccines that are available in this country now are experimental. They're all EUA. There's not one vaccine that is now available in the United States that's been approved. The Pfizer vaccine, one version of it, the Comirnaty vaccine, is approved, but it's not available in the United States. De Blasio is ordering people to participate in a medical experiment. And that, is not something we do in America.
Yeah. Why has it become that? How did we get from the point where it feels like these days, like the government is more like Facebook and CNN and Twitter? These are the judge and the jury of everything, as opposed to like, human beings. And it's still human beings, but as opposed to like an actual government, as opposed to like, it almost seems like the government's like a shell company now for like, for tech. Like I always say, like tech is the new fossil fuel. That's what I feel like a little bit. It's like this, it has such a power over us. Like, how did we kind of let that happen? Was it just money that did it?
Yeah,
am I crazy?
No, I think that's right. And, what we've seen this year is really pretty extraordinary, Theo. It is the abolition of all of our Bill of Rights. So they started out with by controlling those tech companies, they were able to effectively get rid of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Yeah. Madison and Adams and Jefferson said that we put freedom of speech into the First Amendment, because all of the other rights are dependent on it. If a government can stop criticism or dissent, it has a license to commit any kind of atrocity. So as soon as they got rid of freedom of speech, they went after the other half of the First Amendment, which is freedom of religion and worship. It closed all the churches in our country for a year with no public hearing, no debate, no, science shown. They then went after property rights. They controlled it. They shut down 1 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. Then they went after jury trials. You cannot sue. The Sixth and Seventh Amendments say this: no American shall be denied the right of a trial of a jury before a jury of his peers for any case or controversy exceeding $25 in value. Well, that's all it says. There's no pandemic exception.
Right.
Today, jury trials are going in our country if a vaccine company or pharmaceutical company injures you, you cannot sue them, no matter how egregious your injury, no matter how negligent they were, no matter how reckless they are, you cannot sue them.
So if 20 million people die 15 years from now from the vaccine, there can't be a class action suit?
No.
Wow.
You cannot sue them. There's no discovery.
We got to make a vaccine, bro.
Yeah. So
we need to make a vaccine, baby. We need to fucking fire up the stove.
The vaccine will not give you immunity, but it gives the company that made it immunity from liability.
That's crazy.
That's what's happening. And then, now the prohibitions against warrantless searches and seizures are gone, and they're doing. You have to show your vaccine cards and your private medical information to people. There's track and trace surveillance.
Well, it's cost me my value. It's starting to cost me, and this is just my feeling. And I'm obviously a very sensitive person, but it's costing me a lot of what I feel like my whole purposes of being human are. And so it starts to make me feel like there's no real value in me being human. And so I think if you are already predisposed to ideas like that in your head and kind of negative self-thought, then
nihilism.
Nihilism? Oh, nihilism?
Yeah. It's just
I might have misdone it. But I know what you're saying. Nihilism?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nihilism. I didn't know that was it. But yeah, it's like if I'm already predisposed, then that's where I see a lot of my friends who are perishing. It's like because it's just...
The CDC says that 1 out of every 4 people under 20 contemplated suicide this year.
Yeah.
The suicide rates are off the chart. The drug overdose, the alcoholism, the child abuse is down. Why? Because 90% of child abuse was reported by the schools. And the schools are closed. So those kids are now home with their abusers.
Beat them.
And
not really, but yeah, it says there's no way to report it.
No, and all of these other metrics of what of people's ideas of community, their connections to their family, their connection to the community have been obliterated this year. And no, there was no attention.
That's a big part of it.
Lockdown.
Yeah,
he didn't say. There are studies out there. What happens when you unemploy people? And there's a famous study from 1982. It says, and that when we had half the population, so double all these numbers, that every point in unemployment caused 37,000 excess deaths, heart attacks, stress, suicides, etc. 3,300 excess imprisonments, 4,000 excess admissions to mental hospitals. That's what unemployment does. And they just went and gave us 20% unemployment overnight.
Yeah. I remember we had we had like a long mouse when I was growing up, and if we took his wheel out of there, literally like a week later, you could see how defunct he was,
Yeah.
Just because he just had nothing to do. Why, but here's a question I have. So if pharma was like being able to manage all of this with power and money and influence, right? or manage at least like the information that was getting out, and suppressing other information because they advertised enough or were the biggest supporter of different outlets. Why weren't other businesses? Why weren't it like businesses like Hilton or Hardee's, Dickies, Carnival Cruise Lines? How weren't there other big businesses that were lobbying like in the other way, like against this? Like this is, other companies with big money. Why weren't they able to lobby and say this is ridiculous?
Yeah, I think.
You know what I'm saying? Like companies that would. Would
that is a really good question. But I think one of the things they did for those companies is they bought them all off. They paid the airlines and they paid the cruise lines, and they printed money. They're billing the next 10 generations, and they're keeping the corporations rich. And I think, a lot of those businesses didn't want to put their heads up over the parapet. Yeah. Anybody who sticks their head up and says, this is wrong, what's going to come down on them is makes it so that they're too scared.
So your family in the past could have been a victim of espionage.
Yeah.
Do you think that is something that fuels your
I don't know if it motivates me. Really, I stumbled into this issue because I was suing cement kilns and coal burning power plants for putting mercury in fish.
You're the environmentalist. The environment was on the outside, and now they've come inside of us.
And there was a group of women who had children who had intellectual disabilities, and they believed that their kids
talking about this.
were vaccine injured, and they basically forced me to read a bunch of scientific studies. And when I read them, I got pissed off, and that brought me down the rabbit hole. But I've written a couple of books and many articles about about what happened to my family, and my family had a 6-year battle with the CIA. I'm very, very familiar with with all of that intrigue and the involvement in the intelligence agencies in my uncle's death and in my father's death. So because I'm attuned to that, I also I have an open mind about, and an ability kind of to look and say, why are they involved with public health?
Right.
Why are these agencies? The CIA was involved in 73 coups d'etats between 1947 and 2000. 1/3 of the countries in the world. They've never done public health. Yeah. Why are they now deeply involved in public health? And that Event 201,
that's interesting,
as I show in my book, was not one-off. They were doing that drill year after year after year, and each one of them, the CIA was involved, and they were simulating pandemics again and again and again, beginning in 2000, anthrax, smallpox, coronavirus, flu, and every one of them, the CIA was involved. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's the thing. It's like there's a lot of things that I get to into certain chapters, into certain paragraphs, and it's like, man, why is that?
Yeah,
I think that's the number one takeaway that I have in reading as much of this as I have so far. Like, man, why is that? Why is this chef over here teaching rollerblading? You know what I'm saying? Like, why is this business over here with this business? Do you worry about do you feel like you have any lawsuit worries with this book or no?
Was it? No.
Yeah.
I mean, truth is defense to libel, and everything in the book is true.
Yeah.
I mean, there may be, somebody will find a mistake, but I have 2,200 footnotes in there with references. So every statement, factual statement in that book, I have a reference for, a source for that. And we have a QR code that allows, which has never been done before in a book, that allows anybody who reads this book to go to the references and view them on their cell phone.
Oh, wow. Do you think we've become too lazy as a population? Have we already become too addicted to this technology and addicted to just because we've definitely something has happened to the human?
And the problem is that
you think we're cooked, man.
Listen, the ambition of every totalitarian regime in human history has been complete control of the population. They've never been able to do that before. You could always escape to the hills. You could read books secretly. You could have a radio in your, Anne Frank had secret books. She had they had a radio in the basement and all this. Today, you can't do that. Today, there's nowhere to hide. Bill Gates said his 65,000 satellites are going to be able to surveil every square foot of the Earth 24 hours a day. They have track and trace surveillance everywhere now. They have, in China, they've already deployed software that can read guilt on the human face, they claim. So it's pre-crime. Oh. If you feel guilty about it, they can scan a football stadium and pick out the people who look guilty.
We're perverts, too.
The other thing is, what they're doing is these vaccine passports. That's going to completely change our relationship with our rights, because right now you have a whole bunch of rights, right? You can go to the bowling alley. You can go out to a sports game. You can hang out with whoever you want to hang out with. You can get on a plane and travel. You can get educated. You can do all of these things. Now, those are rights. Once you get that vaccine passport, that becomes a privilege. That is conditional on your compliance. So if the vaccine passport says you got to get 4 boosters a year and you didn't do it, you now can't get in the ball game. You can't get on the airplane. The rights are now conditional. They used to be unconditional. Now they're conditional. And here's where we're going. We're going to digitalize currency. So your social credit will be on that vaccine passport. Your credit scores will be on that vaccine passport. And in Europe, this is one of the things when I went over there, 2 weeks ago and gave speeches about the passports, which they're now imposing. Wow. The passports are not being issued by the health departments, the health ministries. They're being issued by the financial ministry. Why is that?
Yeah.
Because we're going to digitalize currency. They're going to be able to look at every transaction. They're going to get rid of currency, which we're already doing. It's already hard to find coins.
Oh, yeah. You can't even, you give somebody $1, they don't even know what to do
That's
anymore.
where we're going. We're going to digitalize currency. They're going to be able to track every single transaction that you have. They're going to be able to tax it. The financial institutions are going to be able to make money on the friction of every transaction, but they can also do what they call programmable money, which is if you are, for example, if you don't get your vaccine, if you're disobedient, and they say to you, okay, you can't leave your house and you can only shop in grocery stores within 1 mile of your house, your currency will now only work in those grocery stores. It will not work in a gas station.
Wow. So if you don't have a passport, then you can't even buy certain places.
Right, or you can't travel. You can't, if they, if you live in Pasadena, it can say your money will only work in Pasadena. It won't work, it won't let you to drive to Brentwood. They can completely control every movement that you have. You can't buy gas. You can't buy anything except what they want you to buy. And that level of control is, I think really destructive, and that's where we're going.
So are people just going to lose, like just tyrants going to take over and just attack the Samsung building, or like what's going to happen?
Well, I think...
How do you rebel then?
This is happening in every country in the world. Yeah. One place where people are standing up is, ironically, it's in the red states in America.
Yeah.
I was in Louisiana yesterday, and I gave a speech, presentation to the legislature there, and they voted against the mandates to children, and it was Democrats and Republicans voting against it. It was a bipartisan vote. But I think in a lot of the states, you go to that state, there's no mask. Same with Florida, same with Texas.
I live in Tennessee some, and there's no mask, and it's been fine. Like, that's the thing. I just don't understand what's going on. Like,
Florida has the lowest infection rate in the country, and it has the loosest rules.
Yeah, so I don't understand how none of the reality of things isn't permeating Some of the smartest people I know
Yeah,
aren't
that's
asking
the-
questions.
That's the
That's
weird
what's
part.
blowing my mind.
Yeah.
Like one of my neighbors, like the smartest dude I know. I'm like, dude, you don't think this? Like you're the one who always tells me to ask questions, and I forget. And now you're not asking any questions. Like you come back to LA, and it's like there's a lot more mandates and stuff here and strictness. Even though I feel like it's getting a little looser though. But then you go.
You still get hostility from people who if you ask questions about it.
Yeah.
You know?
Why? Is there something inside of some people where they're just afraid to question, or do you think that they just, I don't know, some things for me to, if I saw more people dying around me, you know, and I'm not saying people haven't died, but I don't know one person that's died, you know?
Well, people did die, but people are dying of the vaccine too. And we're not, you know, there's 19,000 people whose death has been reported after vaccination. Now, during in 1976, when we had the vaccine, the flu vaccine, 46 people died and they pulled the vaccine. Wow. Now 19,000. And what HHS says is that system is only capturing 1% of the vaccine injuries. It could be much, much higher than that. And you're seeing a lot of people who are dropping dead of sudden death, who are young people who should not be dying. You read about it every day. Yesterday, the editorial page editor of the Washington Post, died suddenly. And you're seeing that, the sports figures who have dropped dead on the field, you're seeing those, and those guys are not being reported as vaccine injuries.
But why wouldn't why wouldn't they be reported as vaccine injuries? And why wouldn't we get that information?
Well, who's going to report it? The doctors, first of all, it takes a half hour to do the report. Doctors don't want to do it, and the doctors are telling themselves that's not a vaccine injury. That guy just had a heart attack. They don't want to admit to themselves that it's a vaccine, particularly if they gave the vaccine to the guy. They don't want to say it was that intervention that killed him. Well, that's the problem with the voluntary system. You need a system that is a machine counting system, which you can easily do. HHS actually developed one. They look at they know who got it, which vaccine, down to the batch number. And then you do a cluster analysis and saying, are those guys more likely to die? Are they more likely to get diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, than the people who weren't? You can look at that, and you can do it very quickly, but none of that is being done. All of that kind of research gets blocked.
It just blows my mind that there's no liability for the companies making things, because I just feel we've had such a it's become obvious for me anyway, and it's just me, that drug companies don't care about people. Like all the people that died of drug overdoses and Oxycontin, all those, it's just like it just seems real obvious. So I don't know why there's just such an immediate it was just this immediate, almost like forced everything was just closing, and it just seemed like everyone was just going to trust suddenly drug companies. That's the part that really, I guess, has always just made me uncomfortable, I mean, I've never trusted anybody.
These are the same companies that gave us the opioid epidemic,
That's what
which
I'm
kills
saying.
56,000 kids a year. And more kids every year than died in the entire Vietnam War over 20 years. Yeah. And every year, and we know they did it deliberately. The four big vaccine companies in this country, Sanofi, Merck, Pfizer, and Glaxo, have paid $35 billion over the last 10 years in criminal penalties and damages for defrauding regulators, for lying to doctors, for killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. Vioxx, which was Merck's drug, it knew it was going to cause heart attacks and kill people.
But I thought they can't be sued for. They can be sued for. They can't be sued for vaccinations.
That's
they
right.
Can be sued for medicines.
But even in the places where they can get sued, their criminal culture is part of who they are. And even though when they know they're going to get caught, they still do it. So what happens to that same company when he knows there's no way he'll ever get caught? Because there's no discovery, there's no depositions, there's no document searches. And even if you find out that he killed you, you can't sue him.
Right. You think Fauci is an evil? Do you think it's evil that's in him? I mean, are you saying that with this book that he's just an evil guy, or do you think he's compromised? Would anybody have been him? It's just a power, and he's just the man in the position. Is there darker forces at work?
Listen, we all, as you know, think of ourselves as we measure ourselves by our intention rather than by our behavior. So I don't know whether he. I don't know how he views himself, but I know that he must believe that it's okay to impose collateral damage on people in order, maybe he's convincing himself there's a larger cause. But, I've documented again and again and again how he's, with the AZT, during the AIDS epidemic, which he knew was poisoning people, killed 330,000 people, and he knew it was doing that and that it was worthless, and he let it happen. Hannah Arendt, who wrote a lot about the Third Reich, she was a philosopher and writer and Holocaust survivor. She talked about death killers during the Third Reich. There were people who worked in the, there were guards in the death camps that were actually killing people, escorting them into gas chambers. She said the worst of the people were the people who killed from their desks, the people who made these big decisions that involved tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and signed it, and then, signed off on it, and then went home and kissed their wife and pet the dog and hugged their children and thought very, very highly of themselves. And I think that's what I think, Dr. Fauci is. I think he's a death killer.
And do you think, and what role does Bill Gates play in it so much? I know you mentioned him a lot in the book.
Gates called Fauci to his home in 2000 and summoned him to his $187 million mansion on the banks of Lake Washington up in Seattle. And he brought him into the den, and he said, I want to propose a partnership with you.
Damn, it's like a damn, what's that movie, dude? With the Italian guys, I'm talking about, Godfathers.
Oh yeah,
God. So you believe that they're just in cahoots?
Well, I know they are, and but
is it just business that they're doing? Do they just think it's just business?
In fact,
do you think that they thinking like,
Michael
I'm gonna
Spector,
kill Sherman or something?
Michael Spector asked Tony Fauci what his favorite line from his favorite movie was, and he said, it's The Godfather, and my favorite line is, it's just business. And I think that, he really does look at this as he's promoting pharmaceutical products. He does not do basic science anymore. He doesn't do the job that he's being hired to do. He develops pharmaceutical products, and he's turned his agency into an incubator for the pharmaceutical company. He creates the products there. He sells them. He shares patents with the big drug companies and with the universities, and then he gets them through the regulatory process and promotes them. And, during his 50-year period there, we've gone from being the healthiest population in the world to the sickest. We are literally, of the top 79 countries in the world.
Are you serious?
We have the worst health. We use 3 times the pharmaceutical drugs of any other nation. We pay the highest prices, and we have the worst health outcomes. Of the 79 top countries in the world, we are the worst.
And he's been in charge the whole time?
Yes.
And is he the one who writes the checks for research? Is it his company?
Yeah, he gives away $7.6 billion a year. And
him personally, he gets to write the check?
He chooses who gets it.
He chooses who gets it. There's not a board that does it?
No, well, he chooses. He runs that agency with a tight hand. What he does is he'll develop these drugs within his labs, and they farm them out to, what they'll do is, in his lab, he has thousands of vials of coronavirus, of dengue virus, of hantavirus, of flu, of, all of the different polio, whatever. And they'll take different combination of molecules and they drip them into that lab culture and see if it kills the virus. If it kills the virus, then they have an antiviral. Yeah. So now they have to see, does it kill the rat? Because if it kills the virus but it doesn't kill the rat, now they have a medicine. Then he farms it out to the university and he gives them money. So the university will do animal studies and they'll do phase 1 studies, which is 100 people basically. He will give that university, the dean of that department, who is called the principal investigator, $15,000 to $20,000 per recruit. So that dean is a doctor. He's recruiting patients to test this drug. He's getting, let's say, $20,000 per patient that he recruits to participate in that trial. The university skims off 50 to 75% of that money, keeps it. So now the university is now partnering with Fauci.
Well,
And
complicit might not be the word.
phase 2 studies and phase 3, where they're bringing in 10 or 20,000 people, they now bring in the drug company. And the drug company gets most of the patent. Tony Fauci could keep some for himself, for his agency, or
It's business.
individuals,
It's business.
right? The university gets to keep one. The university PI gets to keep it. And then Fauci ushers it through the regulatory process. So here's the punchline. Between 2009 and 2016, there were 240 new drugs that were approved by FDA that came through Tony Fauci's shop. So he is the biggest pharmaceutical incubator in the world.
He's the
not,
CVS. He's the
yeah,
top CVS.
he's not doing what he's supposed to do, which was trying to figure out where's the autism epidemic coming from. Why do we now have diabetes?
I remember you talking about this last time we were together. We got one question that came in about that actually from a young man. And thank you for your time, Robert.
What's up, Mr. Kennedy? I have a question for you. I have a 4-year-old autistic son. I know you've done a little research with vaccines and how it all ties in together. Maybe you could dive into that some. And also, with technology growing rapidly, do you think there's a chance for some normalcy for my boy moving forward in his life? Appreciate your time. Big fan, Theo. Gang, gang.
Hey, baby. Guess you kind of answered some of that.
Yeah, where is he calling from? He looked like it was
They look like Oklahoma or something, huh?
in an airplane or something. But
Yeah, he might have been. Who knows, man? Probably trying to get off the planet. I don't blame him, man. It's scary down here.
well, I mean, here's what happened in my generation: 1 in 10,000, between 1 and 2,500. There's a couple different studies that look at the prevalence of autism,
Oh, yeah. We had
and
it.
people are 67. So, in my generation, between 1 in 2,500 and 1 in 10,000 people have autism. Even today, my age, I've never seen anybody with full-blown autism my age.
Oh, I know
Meaning,
a lot of people.
You know people who are like the quirky uncle or the person who's Asperger's or can't look you in the eye.
Yeah, party autism.
I'm talking about full-blown autism. People, men who are 6, 7-year-old in diapers, wearing a football helmet, headbanging, nonverbal, non-toilet trained.
That's Alabama fans, basically, is what you're saying, honestly. But no, I know what you're saying. Sorry.
Stimming, toe walking. I've never seen somebody like that. And I have been around intellectual disabilities my whole life. My family started Special Olympics, Best Buddies, etc. Never seen anybody my age with it. In my kids' age group, it's 1 in every 22 boys, according to CDC. 1 in every 34 kids. Oh, Tony Fauci's job is to figure out why that's happening. When EPA was told, Congress said to EPA, tell us what year the autism epidemic began. The EPA scientists came back and they said in 1989. It's a red line. And so Tony Fauci's got a pretty easy job. He has to figure out an exposure, a chemical exposure, or some other exposure that happened beginning in 1989 that affected every demographic group, from Cubans in Key Biscayne to Inuit in Homer, Alaska, everybody in between, and that that affected boys at a 4-to-1 ratio to girls. There has to be a chemical that does that, or some other exposure. Now, there's a scientist called Phil Landrigan. He narrowed it down to 11 things. 1, glyphosate, which is Roundup.
Oh, yeah, I remember Roundup.
Okay, so
on
you
the
need
plants.
something that suddenly exploded around 1989.
Yeah.
It could be PFOAs, which are flame retardants, which became ubiquitous around that same time. It could be cell phones. It could be ultrasound. It could be neonicotinoid pesticides. It could be corn syrup. There's a limited number of things it can be.
Right.
Right? And it's an easy thing to do the science to figure out which one it is.
And we haven't done it.
And Tony Fauci hasn't done it, but all of these neurodevelopmental, autoimmune, and allergic diseases that suddenly exploded in 1989,
Our businesses.
all of them are also listed as side effects of vaccine on the manufacturer's insert of the 72 vaccines. When I was a kid, I got 3 vaccines. My kids got 72 vaccines, and it changed in 89. Vaccines have to be on that list for a whole lot, and there's a lot of science that says that's what's causing it, including 1999 CDC study called the Verstraeten study that they never released, but we got a hold of it. They looked at the biggest database in the country, the Vaccine Safety Data Link. They looked at kids who got the hepatitis B vaccine during the first 30 days and compared it to kids who did not get it or got it after 30 days. And here's what they found. The kids who got it had an 1,135% greater chance of getting an autism diagnosis than kids who did not. And that is pretty strong evidence.
What do you think is a solution then to kind of where we're at now? You feel like Anthony Fauci shouldn't be in his space?
No, he should be in prison. But the solution is really with all of us. We need to resist. We need, nobody ever complied their way out of totalitarian rule. We've seen our Bill of Rights obliterated. We're seeing a level of totalitarianism that is unprecedented in, but it's not just America, it's across all the liberal democracies in the world. And all the powers these governments have accumulated over the last, to tell you to not do your business, to not go to church, to stay in your house, to put on a mask, to do what you're told. There's no government in history that has ever relinquished power once it got it without a demand. We need to start demanding that our government, that we're not going to comply anymore. And all of us have to. What I tell people is you need to do 3 civil disobediences a day. And that could be just talking to your neighbor and educating them. It could be telling somebody in your local store who has don't come in if you don't have a mask sign. I'm not going to shop here anymore. And it could be, it could be buying my book and giving it to somebody who doesn't. And I don't get any money off that book. It all goes to Children's Health Defense.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it all goes to fund our litigation. And people need to start resisting. We need to start reclaiming our rights. Look, we need to start loving our freedom more than we fear a germ. And there was a whole generation of Americans who lived in 1776 who said there's worse things than dying, and living without these liberties is worse than death.
Yeah.
And thanks to them, we have the Bill of Rights. They put their livelihood, their property, and their lives on the line so that we could have these rights. And in 20 months, we've given them away. We need to get them back.
Oh, look, man, you're a friend, and I've long appreciated you're taking care of the environment and looking out for the environment outside of us and now inside of our bodies, man. I know it's important to you, and I enjoyed the book, man, The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert Kennedy Jr. You guys check it out. It's a interesting read, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Theo.
Now I'm just floating on the breeze, and I feel I'm falling like these leaves. I must be cornerstone. Oh, but when I reach that ground, I'll share this peace of mind I found. I can feel it in my bones, but it's gonna take a little time for me to set that parking brake and let myself unwind.